Right before Russia and Ukraine, drones were used on a tiny, tiny, tiny scale. They didn't just ramp up production. They invented an entirely new way of operating conflict. We realize, well, look, like that could happen to us. When we look at our arsenal, we realize we wouldn't be ready for something like that today.
Let's start off with, you're just moving into this new place. Tell me about like the past year or so and what's been happening.
Yeah, a lot's been happening. We just moved into a new 25,000 square foot facility here in El Segundo, about 2 miles from our previous spot. Team has grown pretty dramatically, just about 30 folks now, and continue to ramp up the business.
Yeah, what's the latest on as far as like how many, like Helioses and landers and stuff?
A lot of the focus in the past year or so has been on supporting a lot of the more sensitive missions the U.S. military works on, which limits a lot of what we've been able to say publicly on this. But I think what that means is we get to support some of the most important missions the U.S. military is working on today. Some of the most cutting edge stuff they're doing. We're fortunate enough to be able to support them on that, and so it's less so looking at numbers of things and more so looking at the impact of the things we are deploying.
Yeah. What are you like super excited about right now?
I mean, there's a lot of things, right? Like on a lot of different fronts. And that's one thing that's happened in the past year is like business has expanded in many different directions. One of the things that I'm really excited about more recently is we're just starting to do a little bit of work with the intel community. So breaking out of just DoD and supporting some of their missions. That gets even more sensitive, so there's even less I can say on that front. But I think the point is, right, the problems that we solve of helping connect systems of all types, right, sensors, drones, robots, cameras, even satellites, it's becoming more and more and more important over time as it becomes the future of the way the military is operating. I think, we sort of saw that coming even a couple of years ago, and I think it's becoming even more and more prescient as time goes on.
Yeah. How are things like changing? I know that we were talking earlier, and I think like over the past 12 months or maybe even like 16 months, it's gotten a lot easier, I believe, for smaller players to come in. Like I think when you did your interview with Jason Carmen, you said effectively you just took the most painful route of, you're basically not being like a subsidiary of one of the bigger guys.
Yeah.
Like, why did you take that path? How's that going for you?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's easy by any measure. We certainly took the chew glass approach. I think it was the right approach. I think a lot of this kind of traces back to where the company started in the first place, where I was doing some work with the Army Corps and the Navy. It was right out of college and working some very early stage autonomous systems tech, and the tech worked, and the question was, okay, now how do we scale this? And the answer I got sort of multiple times was go work with the Raytheon Small Business Program or the Lockheed Small Business Program, right?
And who is giving you that advice?
A lot of folks on the government side, right? Because the idea of taking small companies seriously was very foreign. It's not to say like small businesses haven't existed before, right? The defense industrial base has a very long and excellent history of small businesses supporting all types of defense, but they've always played a very small part in terms of the missions that actually matter, right? They'll be making the screw, but Lockheed is making the aircraft, right?
Was part of it just like the built up trust over many years of operation and stuff with those bigger players?
I think the saying like nobody gets fired for hiring IBM
Right.
very much tracks in defense, right? Where if you're a contracting officer, you can give the contract to one of the primes, and like they're probably not going to do the best work, but they're going to do something. They're going to get the job done, right? They're not incompetent, right? They actually do a very good job with a lot of the stuff they do. They're just large bloated organizations, and so they operate like IBM operates, right? They're more expensive, they're slower, they're less cutting edge. They'll get it done though, right? And so I think what we've seen for the past, up until very recently, over the past couple of decades, is there was a shift away from supporting the newer players in the space and moving towards the trusty old guys. That's shifted a lot, really, and I think even more so since we last chatted a year and a half ago or so, where the DoD has now, in real ways, started to take new companies seriously. Um,
And what do you think catalyzed that shift?
I think there's a few things. I think primarily it was the fact that the large primes that they're shifting away from, uh, they they just underdelivered for so long that it started to become uh, uh, something you couldn't ignore,
You
right?
you mentioned that like a lot of the technology that like the military uses and stuff is the same stuff that they used like 10 or 15 years
Yeah,
ago, which is crazy.
still the case, still the
It's
case,
still the
right? And I think
case.
people, they see the big fancy flashy programs and like there's some really amazing technology that's out there, including from the large primes, right? Like, but I think you look at sort of the underbelly of how the day to day person in the military operates, the systems they use, the computers they use, the software they use. It's still just astonishingly out of date. Um, and to the previous point, right, that the government's now taking small companies seriously. These are the companies that are willing and able to actually address these problems in real ways, and I think it's happening. You're seeing just an explosion of types of companies that are serving the DoD of all types, right? Software companies, hardware companies, combinations across every layer of the stack. And I think it's a very healthy development of the defense industrial base and how it needs to be healthy. And I think a lot of that's been pushed along by both from the technology side of, I think that the sort of tech world has realized that this is actually, one, a big market, but two, a really important market, right? There's a lot of money to be made. I think a lot of the talent is kind of getting fed up with working on a large like B2B SaaS application, and instead kind of want to put their talents to better use. The capital community followed that, where now there's billions of dollars being put into defense tech, where even a couple of years ago, right, you could it was a tiny fraction of that.
What were those early conversations of you trying to raise money for like a defense contractor that you're going to take the painful path and
It was really tough. Like raising money when we first started was incredibly hard.
how many conversations do you think you had before the first person was like, "Yeah, I'll back you,"
Oh
and like, what
God,
was that check?
I really don't even know at this point. A lot. I mean, it was kind of the pushback. Was like, look, defense. We just don't do defense. Like, and a lot of the firms was like, yeah, it seems like a good idea, but it's like in our LP agreements, we cannot fund defense tech. It was something they agreed on with their LPs, right? They have to go back and change it, and a lot of them have since done that. They've since
Yeah,
gone back and changed that because they realized that that clause cost them a lot of money. Because that kept them from actually investing in defense,
and
and
like,
defense has exploded in
yeah,
the last couple of years. I think a lot of it was sort of this, history is over mentality that you see in San Francisco. There's still a lot of that around, right? It's definitely not gone. A lot of that's kind of tampered down and quieted down since the war in Ukraine, but there's still a lot of that, right?
has that seriously shifted like the ability for new companies to get funded as well as I don't know the like military to adopt new technologies?
It's a bit of both. Yeah, I,
Hmm.
I think it's that sort of quieting down of the war is over has made a lot of the sort of capital community that was otherwise resistant to funding defense, because if you look back over sort of the lifetimes of most GPs at VC firms, it was the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, right? It was these long drawn out wars that really didn't go anywhere,
Just didn't end and
right? And
like,
it was just
yeah,
lives and money, and it was just, you have to ask yourself like what we're there for. And so I think it's not entirely without reason, right, that there's this kind of mentality of like you just don't want to be part of that, right? Like there it was not an inspiring thing to do. There was the internet kind of world was so separate, and like there was so much opportunity there. And I think we realized was, sure, those were really drawn out awful conflicts. But conflicts still happen, right? Including conflicts that we don't want to happen, but will happen anyways, right? When Russia invaded Ukraine, what do you expect the Ukrainians to do, right?
fight back,
Like roll over
right?
and let it happen or fight back? And I really hope that if the U.S. was in a similar position, we would do exactly the same as what Ukraine did, right? Which is fight back across every layer of society, right? People are making drones in their garages and shipping them to the front lines. Like that's still happening.
Did you
And
know people that did that? I've
not
never heard
personally,
of that.
not personally,
Okay.
but it's
Okay.
it's 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 how Ukraine has actually been able to manage the production rate they've hit. It's because it's a lot of it's done by
Like just people.
regular people assembling
That's so
drones
interesting.
in their homes. Um,
Is it one of those things like if there is actually a conflict, then all the regulations and stuff just get peeled back to
oh yeah,
just let people rip and like just build the thing that we need?
at at that scale, it's like fuck the regulations, like come after me,
Exactly.
right? Like I mean, what are you gonna do, right? Uh, and so I think in that kind of case, you have a little bit more freedom. But I think Ukraine has deserves a ton of credit. Ukrainian people deserve a ton of credit, right? It's they didn't just ramp up production; they invented an entirely new way of operating conflict. Right before Russia and Ukraine, drones were used on a tiny, tiny, tiny scale.
Yeah.
Um, Almost never for sort of direct strike purposes, except for like the switchblade and larger sort of munitions like that. But in terms of treating it like a day to day munition, that was sort of unheard of. And the Ukrainians essentially invented that, right? At the
Yeah, I know
scale.
like small $1,000 drones and stuff are taking out tanks.
Yeah, exactly.
So
And
yeah.
and it just completely changes the way that a conflict can operate. And that was I think that was a big development, and that big development then trickled over to the US, where on one sense we realize, well look, like that could happen to us, right? It might not be Russia, but it could still happen, right? And when we look at our arsenal, we realize we wouldn't be ready for something like that today, right? And that's just such sort of well accepted sort of belief in the Pentagon today. It's changing,
It's
but
just
like
we're not prepared.
yeah, it's just sort of the broad realization like we're not
Yeah.
prepared for what a future conflict would look like, and it wouldn't look like Ukraine. If there would be a war in Taiwan, it'd be a war Pacific. Like it wouldn't look like Ukraine directly, but it would look a lot more like that than it looked like Iraq or Afghanistan,
Yeah.
right? And we're not ready for that, right?
Basically, new wars are going to be completely different than the last one.
They will, right?
Yeah.
They'll be different than the wars against far. Like that's always the case, right? Throughout history, it's not a new thing, but like you always fight the last war until you realize that you're not like it's not
I know
working.
it's like the same insurance thing where people insure for the last disaster. Home insure or like fire insurance goes up like crazy right after a forest fire and that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's just it's reactionary sort of approach, and um, I think it's hard to imagine where things are going. But I think if you look at throughout history, there's this pattern that repeats itself, and I think we're in a spot right now where we realize that because there's a conflict happening elsewhere that we would not be ready for, we have to look at our own arsenal and realize
Yeah.
that we wouldn't be ready for the same conflict, much less a conflict against even more sophisticated, adversary. And that's really sparked a lot of the impetus on the government side to realize that we need to fund these new technologies. We need to buy them at scale. We need to deploy them. We need to train with them. We need to build them into our tactics. We need to develop new strategies. Um, and that's really in the past I would even say like 12, 18 months. I've seen just a real shift in
Has
how.
that shifted your strategy as well?
Yeah, yeah.
How's that changed over the last like 12 months?
So I think one thing to understand about selling to the government is you're in a very sort of, I guess how you describe this, like there's just sort of culture that you're selling to, and different services have different cultures. Different branches within the DoD have very different ways of operating. For a while, the Air Force was sort of seen as the cutting edge. Like they were the ones that were buying the best new technology, trying things on scale, even if it's not sort of directly Air Force related, but they were the ones who were kind of pushing the envelope, right?
Why do you think that is?
It's just a culture thing. Right? Like
Okay.
they've always been a little bit more forward looking, a little bit more.
Like adventurous almost?
Yeah, yeah. It's hard to kind of pin down exactly why. I'm sure there's some kind of historic reason as to why, but it's a culture thing, right? Culture matters. What I've seen happen more recently, and then of course SOCOM as well, is like always very cutting edge, always very like willing to try things, like much more sort of cowboy mentality. For a long time, Army was like a lot less receptive,
Hmm.
right? They're like, okay, show me how you're going to make my gun that much more efficient, or jam that much less, or like make my tank fuel that much. But like that was kind of the extent of the innovation on the Army side, and really that's shifted a lot in the past year. We've seen just an absolute ton of inbound and interest from army units across the spectrum, that realize that they need to modernize how they operate. And it's not just with drones. I think that's like kind of a big bleeding edge thing, and I think there's been a lot of attention to that. But it's everything under the hood as well. How you both do electronic warfare defensively and offensively. How do you detect and track electronics and devices of all types? How do you integrate that into weapon systems? How do you build new tactics around that? How do you how do you change how the army operates? I think the army is going to be the ones that are adopting, in the long term, a lot of the new technologies being built out today. So we're very much at the forefront of pushing that forward.
How do you think about like figuring out which products to like focus on versus others?
Yeah, there's always more I wish we could do, right? With more, with more time, with more people, with more capital, there's always lots more to do. But I think the way we've always operated is just being very, very close to the end user.
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes a lot of people in the tech world, when they come to the DoD space, is they take a very sort of, they have a lot of hubris. We're like, well, this should be better. Well, sure, maybe it needs to be better, but why? What is the actual reasoning? It is how it is. What are the actual constraints we're operating under? And how do we factor those into the better solution, right? If you're going to build and actually deploy a real solution at scale, you have to understand the entire context in which it's going to be deployed, or it's just not going to be successful, right, at scale. And so how do we kind of go about, building those next things is really just being listening to what the end users are asking for.
And what does that mean to like listen to an end user in your case?
Like go talk to them, right? Like go out to an army base and talk to the talk to the guys on the ground who are struggling with the whatever sort of their problem set is. I think we've seen recently both drone swarming and counter swarming is a big sort of area of interest. Electronic warfare is another big area of interest, and a lot of people on the government side is like they don't have any way to handle that, right? They understand in abstract, they understand like these are things that need to happen, but what does it actually mean, right? Day to day, what does it actually mean to do electronic warfare at scale, right? Not talking about these massive, semi truck looking things that like have all the equipment like that. That's how it was done before. But now we're talking like backpack scale. Okay, what does that mean? How does the individual operate at that scale to do that kind of thing, right? It's just new things they need to train with, and so listen to them, right? Understand where the problems are, and sometimes that's a big new technology. A lot of times it's just making things easier to use, right? It's like simple things, making the software like a little more clear, making the hardware interface like simpler, right? The small things, but they add up. And I think it's true as in every other industry is like just listen to what the customer is asking for. Like they'll tell you what they want. It's up to you to like actually listen to them, right?
Yeah, I know. So like for that first, few interactions or whatever. Okay, what is the first contract, or how do you get that first contract with the government? How did you do it?
Yeah, I was fortunate where our first contract for Picogrid was we won it because we're very close to a couple of units that I was working with right out of college when building these autonomous systems programs. That was kind of our very, very first contract. It was very small. We definitely did not make any money on it, but it was.
That was that first lander.
Yeah, well, the first are a couple landers or prototypes, like the what was before lander. We deployed out on an Air Force base. And that was kind of our foot in the door, right? That allowed us to prove out the tech, to demonstrate it in a real operational environment, to fix the bugs that did come up, and just really learn, right? And then that kind of spiraled, like, the government's still a very small space and people move around a lot, and like there's some bad sides to that, but one good side of that is like it's also a very small community.
You just build a relationship with one guy and he moves to the next person.
My last the last installation I was at, they had this other problem. You should talk to this guy. Okay, well, like you kind of like run this network, and so it's very relationship driven. It's very trust driven, right? Like they want to put their own reputation on the line if the tech works, and you have to not make them look bad.
Yeah. How do you go about like building that trust with, I mean, they have to be able to rely on your like systems and they want to rely on, their partners, right?
Yeah.
How do you build that trust?
I mean, it's a very hard thing to build. Like it's very personality driven. It's who the people are on the other side of the table. It's what they care about. I mean, like they want to see it operating in other environments, right? And so it's your job to show that, to show it operating, to show it working well, to show how it works, to show like to even be I think they're used to saying like seeing, hey, this works 100% of the time perfectly every time, right? Be honest about where it fails, right? Where the limits are, where you're building out today, what are the next generation things, like bring them into the roadmap. Is something that I've seen very few companies do in this space that we do all the time. All right.
Why do you think like people avoid doing it?
I think again, it's a culture thing where there's this culture in the tech community of sort of move fast and break things, right? Go to a demo and it's totally fine if the demo doesn't work. Like it's kind of expected, right? If it works, it's like
you probably didn't ship hard enough or fast enough.
Exactly. And so there's that sort of expectation, which that there's some people on the government side that are open to that, but the bar is quite a bit higher.
Yeah.
Where if you're going to a demo, they expect it to work and they expect it to do
like function and do what you told it
exactly.
Can do.
Yeah, and if it doesn't, like that looks really bad, right? Obviously, but like it's a different way of looking at things. Like the truth is, right? They needed to know that they can rely on this tool, this thing, on their worst day, right? That is the bar you need to cross. So of course, I understand like a lot of new tech doesn't. It's not going to get there on day one, but when you bring that to the customer, it needs to be that much further along, right? So it takes a little bit of extra work and extra effort into diligence to get to that level. But once you do, and it does work, and you have sort of the kernel of what is working for, say, a new product, bring them into the roadmap. Have them suggest what new features need to be built, or how you can change the physical layout, or how you can make it better, faster, or integrate a new thing. Like all of that, like you should be able to bring them in for. And not everyone's going to be receptive to that. Like a lot of people are, they want to clock out at 4:30 and go home, and that's fine, right? You're going to see that.
It's your job to like find the person inside that doesn't want to do that.
Yeah, and like
exciting.
You'll know when you see it, right? Like these people that actually see their job as of supporting the military and helping make military the best fighting force they can make it. And like you'll definitely know when you see it. Like they're few and far between, but they're there, and I think they're getting more and more bold as time goes on, because I think we're seeing just the urgency pick up, and you need those kind of people to actually address that.
What's been the most challenging thing over the past year or so?
Oh boy. Oh boy. Like a lot of things.
What's the first?
I think one thing like that sort of comes to mind is just scaling a business, and all that goes into just scaling the organization is always hard. Like it's perennially hard, right? I think the human brain is not good at understanding exponential growth very well, right? Even when you like look at paper, you see, okay, that is an exponential
the graph is going up and faster.
Like it's hard to wrap your mind around. Well, like I changed how the organization operates 3 months ago. Why do you? It's because that's how exponential curves work, right? Like. And things like have to change at a really fast clip, and so just really continuing to build it out and be efficient, and operate the organization as it should be operated, with the right people, with the right structure, with the right communication paths, with the right sort of levels of autonomy. It's tough.
Is it hard to like not only have to do this yourself, but also you have to find people, and like you have to stay ahead of the curve so that when if it's growing, and becoming a different company every 3 months, you have to be growing into that.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I have to go into that, like in terms of all that goes into running a company of, exponentially larger scale every couple months. You have to kind of stay ahead of that curve. You have to be very much. And this is not unique to defense, right? This is any sort of company as it grows. Is if you want to be operating efficiently, you have to consider a lot of these things. Like who are the next hires, the next positions that will open up in the next couple of months that we should start hiring for today,
to be prepared.
Because like a lot of, especially for like more senior hires, like they will take a couple months to find the right person, right? You're going to interview a lot of people to find the right person for that role, and so it's a multi-month journey. And so if you start that process when you need that person, you're already late, right? You need to like
Yeah, you basically are on the back foot, and you're
yeah,
like, oh god.
you're always on the back foot, and so you're always trying to like stay ahead of the curve in whatever way. And as a company, grows, there's just lots more levels of complexity and lots more things to build out. And so, I think that's one of the harder things that I think people talk about, but I think it's one thing to talk about, one thing to experience.
Yeah, what's been the biggest thing for you over the past, a year ago, you have some mental models, and after a year worth of growth and all this stuff, you think to yourself, oh man, I really under indexed on that, or, I'm going to change what I'm doing in the future.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think I probably under indexed on the importance of really, really high quality people. Um,
How did that manifest?
um, I think in a couple ways, but like so when you see it, right? Where you bring someone on the team who's just an absolute killer, who's um, uh, going far above and beyond, like thinking three steps ahead, like kind of not like waiting for
The like A
direction.
plus player.
Yeah, and like we have a lot of those on the team, but like you kind of you hire the next one, you're like, wow, like like we're so much further ahead than I could have thought of because this person like went off in that whole new direction I didn't even consider, right? Um,
It's like you're almost moving so fast, like you're succeeding too much that it's like hard to keep on succeeding.
yeah,
It's like everything's
yeah,
breaking.
and so and like I think the thing is like as you grow a company, as you grow any sort of system of any type, you will have bottlenecks, you will have things that are broken, you will have things that need repair, you will have things that need more, they can be operating more efficiently. Um, and I think as you grow as a company, it quickly becomes too much for one person to handle, right?
Yeah.
Like I can't be in every part of the company all the time. But hiring really good people means that you have really good representatives in all those parts of the company that are identifying those bottlenecks, that are identifying those inefficiencies, that are identifying new growth paths that we hadn't even considered before, new opportunities. Um, and so I guess previously I guess I didn't really appreciate or value the importance of that, and what that actually. People always talk about hire good people, but like why? Like what does it actually mean? Oh, is it like do really good work, like write really good code? Not really, right? Um, it's all the other things around the business and like around the operations, around the system. That's what really good people are really good at. Is everything else, right? Not just the tech. Like you need really good people on the technical side
Yeah.
for sure, but you need people who like think like founders. Um, and we hired a guy recently who was a former founder, and uh, it's funny to see like the
The
mental
mental
model.
gear is
It
working.
it, it,
Yeah.
it changed. Like I don't know how it works, but like it's a very different company and business as well. But like somehow being a founder like permanently scars you in certain ways.
But in a good
In a
way.
good way, where
Yeah.
like you learn to really cut through the bullshit very quickly, and not get bogged down by details. And
One thing I've noticed is that if you like hire former founders or if you bring on former founders, they just have way higher agency. They don't require a whole bunch of micromanagement. They're just doing their own thing, and they're kind of like thinking
yeah,
in that mode of you, and they're saying like in your shoes, like what should we be doing? And they're trying to take those next steps without being told.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's really hard to train people. Like I don't know why, because I think like former founders of all types of businesses have that sort of agency.
Even if
Maybe
they
it's
completely failed.
yeah, even more if they fail,
Yeah.
right? Because they've learned a lesson the really hard way. Like
They've chewed the glass.
they chewed the glass and like gone through that pain. Like they understand why did it fail, right? What are the inefficiencies? What could we have changed before that fixed it, and how can we apply those lessons today, right? So it's really hard to train in people. Like people can kind of be trained up to get to that on some small scale, but I think you kind of get to chew glass to to really get it on any sort of large scale.
Are you trying to be really conscious about like who you hire right now? Because you are growing very quickly, and you want to make sure that you're not like you don't have to make the decision twice.
Yeah.
I assume.
We made some hiring mistakes previously. Really smart, really good people who just culturally weren't a good fit. And I think sort of learn the hard way with a lot of these things. I think we have got better at hiring, at filtering out the right people, not just technically, but also those other sort of skills that really matter when you're at this stage of a company. Because you're not just going to throw someone at a problem. you don't want the person like solve that problem very quickly and then figure out the next 3 or 4 problems that are beyond that I hadn't been considered, right? If that person solves a problem and sits there and waits, like you can't be everywhere all the time, right? And so it's hiring the people that can do that. And unfortunately, a lot of really good engineers are the latter, not the former. Where like they could crank out awesome like project, but then you ask them like, why did you do this?
Like, because it was awesome.
Yeah, because it's hard, because they like doing hard things. Like that's not in this space. That's like not a good answer, right?
They don't have as much of the why.
Yeah, and like really getting to the why is really important. So in our space, like hiring people who were formerly in the military, very very important, who understand things in different ways, that and sort of understand like the multi-level sort of implications of a decision, that someone who's out from outside the space doesn't necessarily sort of understand.
How do you like so I know it's a little bit hard to filter on the like going inside, but like what does your hiring process look like to filter for those high agency, go-getters?
For one role, we hired, or we really needed a person with high agency. We just did not respond to anyone who didn't reach out to us separately from the application. Like we didn't even talk to them, right? It's like if you actually have agency for this role, you 100%
They just
are
like
not.
email the CEO or something.
Yeah, exactly. And like every time that happens, and probably I'm gonna regret saying this, but like, every time it happens, like I will push that to the team, right? Even if the person's resume like isn't super stellar, I think it shows a degree of agency, which is like that's hard to train. Like teaching technical skills, it is trainable. Teaching those, like the agency, is really 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 hard to train, almost impossible, right?
I had another person that I interviewed say that basically if someone wrote a hand, this was towards the end of the interview, so if they were watching through that, maybe they cared, right? But like if they wrote a handwritten letter and sent it to him, they'd go straight to the top of the stack.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I think it's really important. And unfortunately, I think a lot of companies disincentivize that, right? Especially larger companies, like, oh, you have to go through the right channels. Like, fuck the channels.
Yeah, it's exactly the opposite.
Fuck the channels. Like, exactly. I've never had any respect for channels. Like, they're stupid. They really are. Like, they're just ways to build in more bureaucracy. Find the quickest path to solving the problem, right? I like the Isaiah Taylor's saying like attack the critical path, right? If you're a person without a job, your critical path is to get a job. How do you do that? Like, who's the decision maker? Who's going to say get the job? Right?
It says yes.
It's not like the third tier HR person, like who just is like basically AI reading different resumes. Like that is not the critical path, right? Find the critical path and solve it. Yeah, so it's hard to train, but I think in terms of the process, I still do the intro calls for pretty much every role today. Very short, like 10, 15-minute intro calls.
Mm-hmm.
You can tell a lot in 10 or 15 minutes of how someone operates, how they think, do they actually care. And from there, like kind of push on to like the tech screen, assuming they pass that, like then do another round of coming on to meeting the team, doing talking sort of more in depth and like what the problems they're solving, why they solved them. On the engineering side, I think one excellent sort of piece of advice that I received is just ask them like what they did like 10 times. Like what's a project?
Do they give you different answers?
No. Like in terms of like tell me a project you worked on you're most proud of, right? It's like is a common question I'll ask. Okay, what do you do on that project? It's like usually there's multiple people in the project. What did you do? No, not like what the project does. Like what specifically did you do, right? And then you drill down like what's like a non-obvious problem that you had to solve when you were doing that. Every problem is going to have some kind of thing that's non-obvious you went into you didn't realize. If you can't answer that, you probably didn't like either do much, or maybe you just like didn't even like you were just kind of taking credit for you didn't care, like you were just kind of like cranking things away. And keep asking questions like that, like really drill down. I think the candidates who really excel are the ones who like get excited about that. They're like, oh, this person actually cares about this weird little technical detail that there was some like weird kernel bug I had to fix, and like this like that like kept this whole thing from working, and like that's the kind of stuff that like wow, like that person really cares, and like they actually went to that next level rather than like, oh yeah, I just did it because I was told to. It's like okay.
Yeah.
And so you can tell that pretty quick.
Yeah. what is the thing that's like weighing on your mind the most right now?
Mm. I think there's a lot more we could always be doing. Right? There's always a new use case or mission set or problem to solve. Um, and there's only so many resources we have at a given time, right? So many people to manage these things. And so it's constantly the tension between spreading ourselves too thin and really concentrating on the opportunities that matter, right? And this is a very relationship driven game. It's a very sort of intensive game that the sales cycles for some of these contracts, especially like the larger ones,
It's like a year.
multi years.
Yeah.
Like going from like completely new sort of ideation all the way through like large program. Like these things are multi year efforts, and so they take a lot of intensive work to get right. And so I think one of the things that's constantly constantly sort of battling is it's like how do we best deploy the resources we have, the people we have, the engineering we have to tackle these problems, and what are the problems that are good opportunities, but we just we want to refocus on other things, and what are those like future things we haven't like unlocked yet. Like that's it's always is a very gut wrenching feeling when like you find the day after like the industry day for a large program, like the sale thing is happening, right? I think we've gotten much better at that in the past year, but like it's still like these things still happen. I think it's just such a large space, and so I think the thing that weighs on my mind is just like um, how do we manage that growth and really capture the opportunities that will be transformational. Which ones do we leave behind? Which ones do we go after? Um, it's it's uh,
It's
it's
not
a
easy.
it's like no, it's a constant struggle. Right? It really is.
Yeah. You have a very unique, I mean, I don't know if unique is the right word, but your method of operating your business and growing your business is very different than the
Yeah.
traditional playbook in
Well,
like VC and startups.
yeah. In the
Um,
VC world, yes, but not.
yeah. Who's like the role model in your head for the type of business that you want to run? Like every founder builds their business in a slightly different way, and they have some idea of like the company that they're excited to wake up in the morning to build.
Yeah.
Who's that for you?
Funny enough, my grandfather. So, um, my grandfather told a story a few times. I don't know if I told it on the last one, but um, he ran businesses kind of his entire life, like small businesses, and he eventually, had a farm in Ohio that was sort of a small, did like cows and sort of some crops, like very very sort of small business, middle class kind of existence. And when he was sort of on his deathbed, and my dad, who just started a business at the time, sort of went to him and was like, hey, what's the secret, right? You were very successful. You've had a lot of failures, you've had a lot of successes, and he goes, son, gotta have more money coming in than going out. Which sounds so like yes, of course, but you'd be surprised at how infrequently like that's considered,
Right.
right? And of course, you can make investments, and you can have sort of loss periods where you're gonna. Of course, you can do that, but on net, at the end of the day, in the long term, you got to have more money coming in than going out, or at least a path to get there, right? Um, and I very much am subscribed to grow very fast, like move very aggressively, like really build a really big business. Um, but like you can always sell dollars for 90 cents, and you'll be
You'll be able to grow
you'll have
fast
an
if you can
incredible amount of
supply the
revenue, right?
dollars. Right. Exactly.
Like revenue wise, you'll be like you can sell it all day, right? Um, but that's not a business, right? That's just a like that's just a loss making enterprise, yeah. And so you have to consider how that's going to operate. I think it's funny how infrequently like that is considered among a lot of sort of the venture space, especially in sort of like the hard tech or defense tech space, right? These are hard businesses. They're very capital intensive. They take a long time to grow. Of course, they can go very, very large, and when they work well, they work very well. But you have to be incredibly like driven by the finances behind it, for you to actually build a sustainable long-term business, right? And I think people often scale too quick, where they actually don't have that under the hood, right? They don't have any sort of scalable.
Do you think it's scaling too quickly, or do you think it's like building, not really like fully knowing what to build and like who wants to buy it? Or
I think they're both sort of symptoms of the same problem, where even if you have sort of like a good sort of product or a good sort of way of selling it, like what does a business model look like, and where is it? How do you adapt that for the given customer, and how do you change it over time? And I think one of the things that becomes harder, and I've even noticed this, even as a 30-person company, is like the way you're able to move as a 3-4-person company is astonishing, right?
how long were you at that stage of just a few people?
Probably about 9-12 months or so, and
Are
like,
you glad that you didn't just like start hiring
oh yeah,
immediately?
oh absolutely, like we probably would have been dead at that point if we did. I really wanted to. It was painful, but in hindsight, no, it was definitely the best thing to not.
You wanted to hire people, but
Yeah,
you decided not to
we just
because
didn't
you
have the
just
money.
didn't have the money.
We didn't have any money.
Was this one of the symptoms of no one wanted to like
Yeah,
fund you?
yeah. No, I think at the end of the day, like that made us a much better business, right? Because a lot, like it forced us to really focus on how do we
Cash has to be coming in the door.
yeah, cash has to be coming in the door, and we have to find a way to actually operate as a business,
Yeah.
right? You can always burn money, you can always sell dollars for 90 cents, you can always do that. But I think a lot of founders are very like won't admit it to themselves when like that's what they're doing, where they're just selling dollars for 90 cents, with good branding. And I always encourage founders to at least be cognizant of that, right? Which seems so obvious. Like that's what a business has to do, right? If there's going to be any sort of success in the future, you have to have more money coming in than going out. Like that is how businesses operate. Like it's either you do that or you eventually fail or get acquired. Like there is no path to long-term sustainability without that.
Yeah.
Like it's just obvious, right?
It seems obvious.
And it's not to say like raising ventures is a really good tool for growing quickly. Assuming you have like a really good business under the hood that you can scale, and even if you scale unprofitably, you're ramping up your engineering, you're ramping up your BD team, you're ramping up a lot of the company, and that will pay off. Like that's why venture is there. That's why capital is there. Yeah. It's not there to go burn a bunch of money and then ask yourselves like why when I finally increase my prices to be profitable, nobody wants to buy it anymore. Like you got to get to that point before you start scaling, or you're going to sort of paint yourself into a corner that will be very hard to get out of as you scale, and as it becomes just harder to shift on a dime.
Has the like the frugality just been absolutely baked into your DNA as far as like a company and yourself?
Yeah.
Because you just didn't have any money at the beginning.
Yeah.
And like I know the last time that I came by Picogrid, I was coming by the other location. Was at the first like actual factory.
Yeah.
Okay. There was people working like on the sidewalk outside because there was no space inside. I mean, you have like an extreme, the utility per square foot was very high in that location. At what point were you like, okay, it's time to expand as far as like actually getting this larger factory? What did you have to see business wise and stuff to make that decision?
It's very subjective. Mm-hmm. I mean, literally, like within 3 months we moved into there, we had a couple recent hires be like, we need to find a bigger spot. I'm like, do we?
Well, that's what I heard. It's like, yeah, people immediately were saying.
They always do. I mean, like, I think people mean very well, but I think people always want to hire another person. They always want to have more space. That's always the case, right? And so some healthy pushback on that is important, right? To finding this place, like it did take us a while.
What were you searching for?
We want to stay in El Segundo, which is hard to expand square footage in El Segundo. There just aren't that many places that are on the market at any given time. We wanted a place that wasn't stupidly expensive. There were some larger places at the time that I just started looking that were good size, but they were way more expensive on a per square foot basis, where it just didn't make sense. And so ended up finding this place and sort of jumped on it the day we toured it. This used to be Castellan's office, their first office. They recently relocated to Torrance, to a much larger space in Torrance. They sort of it grew out of El Segundo. There wasn't sort of space at that scale they could operate in.
That kind of seems to be the theme.
Yeah.
You start in El Segundo as a small company, and then
Yeah.
by the time you scale up to like 100 plus people, you kind of have to leave.
You kind of have to, go to Torrance or go to one of the industrial parks nearby, which is, not great. And like there are some places that are just like don't come up at enough of a clip where sometimes you're going to get pushed out, or some other requirements. Like I know Isaiah ended up in Hawthorne, not because of square footage, but because of height requirements. And like the height for the reactor they're building, they couldn't find a spot in El Segundo that had enough height in the building. I know Teddy Feldman's kind of dealing with some similar problems right now.
Those huge, drill.
With those drill rigs, right? Like these things are 20, 30 feet tall. Like you couldn't really fit it in here with
barely.
Yeah, it'd be very tough. So like want to find a spot that was like a good size, that was reasonable on like a dollar basis, and I think like fit the company, which I think was one of the surprising things that we toured a lot of places. They're like, it
just doesn't feel right.
It just doesn't feel right.
Right.
It just doesn't feel like this is the place for the company to grow. And I feel like this place really did feel like that.
Yeah. Was it just like instant? You walk in here and you're just like, this feels good.
Yeah, it felt good. I mean, it's kind of funny enough, like very similar in terms of layout to our previous spot, just much larger in every dimension. So we previously had like one little like office in the front, in like the front space, and now we have sort of entire like built out office space a bit up here in the front. We had the whole warehouse and space in the back, and like that's much larger now, in all dimensions. So it just felt like a really good sort of a scale for the company to grow into. And I mean, if all things go well, give it a
just be completely filled up in like
a
few months.
Yeah, give it a year or two, and we'll be bursting with the seams here.
We'll look like an Amazon warehouse, just completely packed.
Yeah, I mean, you start at some point, you got to go vertical, right? And
exactly. If you're not going vertical, I'm not bullish.
Yeah. If you're not going vertical, you don't actually need the space.
Exactly.
Sorry. We started like storing things on top of the bathrooms. That was when we started to. I was like, okay, maybe we actually do need more space.
Were you waiting until people were like pounding on your door saying like, we have to do something? There's not enough space.
Yeah, I mean, I think what really kind of did it for me is when production started to take a hit because we didn't have enough space. And for us, as with a lot of companies in defense, you build multiple products because you're trying to serve different missions. You're trying to serve different use cases in different ways. So you end up building multiple products to do that. So we have 3 different hardware products. And one of the challenges of manufacturing on what they call like a high mix manufacturing line is sort of tear down and set up. So you have different parts for different products, different ways they need to run through the production line, different tools, just different things, right? You can be smart about that, by reusing the same tools or reusing the same sort of fasteners across different things. But there's still sort of some tear down, some set up for any production line. And so what we got to with the previous spot is we were trying to move production at such a clip that we would do sort of production run of product A, then do a teardown, which took a good day or two to like fully get things reorganized, get everything all set up, then try doing a production line of another thing.
It's almost like a chef's kitchen, and you have to use the exact same line for like 5 different main things that take 6 or 8 hours to prep each time.
And so that was, I think, the big thing that was a forcing function for me, is realizing that like there's actually a real hit to production and downstream of that to sort of revenue growth.
It's like a just dampener on growth, and also just people being able to be effective.
Yeah, and so like we were late on like delivering hardware. We were like falling behind on things. Like it was just really hard to keep up.
And how long were you in that space? Was it like 2 years?
About a little over 2 years.
A little over 2 years.
Moved in February of 23.
If you had to guess, how long are you going to stay here?
I mean, again, like human brain's really bad at understanding exponential curves. So, I would say about the same time as the last place, but I think, there's certainly a chance that even within like 12 or 18 months, I think there's, we might be kind of bursting at the seams, with this current spot. So it's really hard to say. Right? I think when it starts to cause production capacity to fall behind um, where it needs to be for us to grow,
So like
that's
even if it costs more to be in somewhere else, like it makes like financial decision
yeah,
or
yeah. I
sense.
mean, you want the space to grow just ahead of the
The
company,
company. Yeah.
right? And so, I mean, this place right now feels really big for previous spot. The last place we moved into felt really big for where we were when we moved in there, right? But it allows you to kind of ramp up, and you know, be the business that you want the company to be. And when you're building physical things, like a lot of that is constrained by space.
Yeah.
Space multiplied by usage of space.
Yeah. What is your typical like day look right now?
um, Kind of all over the board. Still very involved in product. Very involved in the engineering of a lot of the things we're sort of building out right now internally, which I still love to do. Like that's sort of my background is on really software, but on product more generally. Um, Still involved in that, less so than I used to be. Driving a lot of the BD conversations or sort of sales and growth conversations, and kind of stepping in when it makes sense for
Do
me
you
to do
try
that.
to be as close to the customer as possible, like personally?
I try to.
Hmm.
There's still a couple customers that I'm on a texting basis with, especially some of our earliest customers that are still sort of sticking around, which is good. And when I can, trying to get to the level with other folks as well, sort of new customers, and understand sort of their problems. It's tough now because to get to that level, you need a lot of like dedicated hands-on time, which is hard to.
You just don't have all the hours in the world, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, you just don't have the time to dedicate that amount of attention to it to a given unit. And so oftentimes, like other folks on the team will have those kind of relationships with different folks. So do quite a bit of that. Of course, hiring and just like building out the company and the operations of the system as well. So split kind of across the board. And I think I was asked recently, like by one of the new hires, like what do you do? It's a fair question. It's a fair question. Like I think my as I see my job is sort of twofold, right? So primary focus is identifying and putting out fires, right? Like be the firefighter, right? And fires aren't necessarily always like the company will end tomorrow if we don't solve this, but they'll get there, right? If you let them sort of smolder for long enough.
And also partially like figuring out if even if there is a fire, like is it worth actually
Yeah.
spending time on and trying to put it out in the first place?
So the weeks where I'm the most nervous and most on edge are weeks where I don't see a fire because I know it's burning. I know there's something burning.
So you just got like anxiety in the back
I'm
of your
just
mind,
like
like sleep, not
yeah.
able to sleep at night, think
I'm
about
just
like
trying
what
to
the fuck is going on.
truly like honestly when
When everything's going right, you get nervous.
I'm more nervous than when things are going wrong. Which is a really funny thing I've sort of discovered. So like that's one, which I think is like, and that's like so keep the business running, keep it operating efficiently. The other one is growth,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not just growth in terms of like new customers, but what are the new products, what are the new angles, what are new like avenues to go down that are building ahead of the curve,
Mm-hmm.
right? That is a big part. It's what I've always done, but I think even more recently that now we have teams that are handling the engineering, we have teams that are handling the BD, we have teams that are handling the operations, we have teams that are handling a lot of the broader functions. I still have to be involved on some level with that, but it's growth, right? It's
Moving in the right direction.
moving the right direction, trying to see around corners, trying to, like I was saying earlier, right? Like who are those people we need to be hiring 3 months from now based on our current trajectory and our current challenges that right now are like, yeah, it's a little bit uncomfortable. In 3 months, it'll be like, this is a real like limitation to growth. Solving that now.
Like total bottleneck.
Yeah,
And trying to figure out what
exactly.
that bottleneck is.
Trying to figure out not where the bottleneck is today, but where the bottleneck is in a couple months from now.
What's your hit rate like on figuring out those bottlenecks? Like has there been any in the past 12 months where you just didn't see something coming and 3 months goes by, you should have been working on that and it just absolutely crushes things?
It's a good question. It's hard to say. it's really hard to say, right? I think there's plenty of cases where I wished I moved faster, or sort of moved earlier, to hire someone or make a change or whatever. Everything's clear in hindsight, so it's hard to beat yourself up about it. Um,
Yeah, you shouldn't even necessarily beat yourself up about it. It's just
yeah,
like, if you get like 12 out of 13, you've done a
yeah,
great job.
yeah. I wouldn't say it's that high. Again, like human brain's really bad at understanding
One out of
exponential
seven,
curves.
maybe.
Yeah, but anything reasonably well. But it's always balancing it right against like where we are as a company. Like, the more senior the hire, like these people get very expensive, right? And but it's not just that; it's also how they operate, right? A lot of really senior people cannot operate by themselves. They need a team to operate efficiently and effectively.
Yeah.
So you're not hiring one person; you're hiring five, right? The person and like sort
You're
of their
hiring the guy that can control or like manage those 5
yeah,
or 10
but
or
like, but
20.
they won't be able to
Yeah.
operate until they have that team under them, or like then you're just paying a lot of money for someone who cannot operate. We made a sort of hiring mistake at the end of last year where we hired somebody who's very very senior, very experienced, like very um,
Very
paper
good.
on paper
Mhm.
exactly who we needed. Um, I think unfortunately, and I think it was just really like just not a good fit. Um, he just had a hard time, meeting the culture and the pace and like the way we operate. And would have been really good if we had a team around him for like this role. We didn't, right? He was the person for that
Did you
space.
kind of want to have him build out the function?
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. And I think it just didn't work. Like he came from some larger companies. I think was really interested and sort of mission driven about working in this space. But at the end of the day, you need people who can operate and who can work well. And so unfortunately, had to cut him loose. Um,
How fast do you make those decisions when someone's not working? Like, does it take a week, 2 weeks?
when it's not working, it takes like
You just make the call.
instant. Yeah. Um, but sometimes it does take a while to know that it's not working, right? People need time to ramp up. Like they're not going to be good perfectly day one. So when do you call that, right? It's tough. Sometimes you just know, right? Sometimes it does take a little bit of extra time. There was a case last year, really amazing engineer, but just was not fitting with the team. Wasn't
Just not a culture fit.
not a culture fit. I think took a lot of baggage from like the previous industry he was working in. That was not a good fit for how we operate. Um, and I wish I'd cut it earlier for both for him and for us as well, because it just wasn't a healthy thing. So had to come. I probably waited a month too long on that front.
Hmm.
But
Was it kind of like thumb sucking, where you just like know what you should be doing, but you just don't want to
in
do it?
hindsight, yeah. Like in hindsight, like yeah, I was like this guy's just not working out, and I think I just gave him too many chances.
Hmm.
Um,
Did you update your model at all, or did you?
yeah, no.
Okay.
After
Yeah.
that, I got much more sort of like trust my gut. But everything is clear in hindsight.
Yeah. Okay. Let's end on what over the next like 6 to 12 months. What are you most excited about?
It's a great question. There's a lot of things. I mean, we get to support some of the most critical missions for the U.S. military, which is there's a lot of really exciting work on that front. Of course, it means it's very difficult to share publicly, um, but I think seeing the culture shift on the military side now change, and kind of being ahead of the curve on that front has put us in a really really strong spot. That there's a lot of opportunities that are kind of opening up now, for us to grow. That I'm very very excited to move into and support, and really help our customers kind of meet the needs that they know they need to hit and don't really have a good way to hit them. And so there's a lot of that front. Of course, like that comes down to product, and product is kind of the enabler for that. But I think what I'm most excited about is helping actually drive those missions forward. right?
Yeah.
And do what we can and adapt the product whatever way we need to adapt it to help them operate.